So let's talk about the nephron and how important it is. The nephron, we have about 1 million nephrons per kidney. You're going to keep seeing pictures with one or two nephrons in those renal pyramids, but just please keep in mind they're filled with nephrons, and they're really the star of the show. They're a functional unit of the kidney. They filter out blood and eventually create urine. Really, the goal is not to just create urine, it's to recycle, 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 and anything that we can't recycle will become urine. But if we have too much water, we're going to balance that out too, and push that out. There's really two types of nephrons, and you could see in this picture, you could see a longer nephron and a shorter nephron. You could also see that there's a lot of arteries and veins that go around the nephron. This one's just a wacky picture, I don't know why, but you can see a lot of arteries and veins that go around the nephron. That's because when we dump stuff into the system, like water or something, it gets picked up by these arteries and gets dumped into the venal system and leaves the nephron. The two types of nephrons are going to be the cortical nephron. They have short loops right at the bottom, and they produce the majority of your urine. That's why there's 80% of them. And then there's the Juxta Medulla nephron, or JMN, and that's going to be this longer one. They actually even have a longer one than this. And basically, they're going to go ahead and maintain sodium levels and water balance in the body. And that's the one that I'm going to mostly focus in on because it's got a little extra abilities. So that's the one I'm really going to talk about. But this guy is going to be the one that produces 80% of the urine. It mostly does water absorption, where this does water and ion absorption. So if we first start out looking at the nephron, our first sort of area that we're going to go ahead and deal with is that we have our glomerulus, and what you're seeing here is a artery. We're going to go ahead and have our afferent arteriole, and then our efferent arteriole. And what this is going to be is blood is going to come in, blood with red blood cells are going to come in, and you can see here we have these little slits in our kidney. And this is where we're going to filter out anything that's liquid. So it's going to go ahead and filter out all the liquids, and they're going to go in this opening, this capsular space. And anything solid, like the red blood cells, maybe some hormones that are a little big, they're going to keep flowing out of here, and eventually they're going to go through the efferent arterioles. And we're going to be able to control speed using some hormones of how fast blood goes through this. If it's going to go slow, we're going to be able to do a really good filtration. If we're going to move really fast, we're going to do a fast filtration, and there's reasons for those things, and we'll talk about those soon. If we keep going, the part of the kidneys, we're going to have our proximal conventional tubule, or PCT. That's the longest. It's going to have a ton of coils, and it does the majority of reabsorption. And what we're reabsorbing here is mostly water. We're going to have the bottom loop of the nephron, and that's going to be the loop of Henle. It's U-shaped, and you'll see that there's a thick segment and a thin segment. The thick segment is actively transporting salt. The thin segment is one more shot at getting water out. Really, the whole nephron is designed to get as much water out and put it back into your bloodstream as possible. We'll have our distal tubule, and that's going to be for hormone regulation. We can do speed there. We can control what the nephron does, even at the end of the nephron. And then, of course, we're going to have the collecting tubule, and that's where we're going to go ahead and collect all of that urine, the waste product, and eventually get it out. So if we were to go ahead and do all those again, you'll notice a couple things. You'll notice that we have our blood coming in. So we have our afferent and then efferent bloodstream. You'll notice that there's a lot of arteries and veins that surround the nephron, and they're designed to, anytime the nephron secretes stuff out, because it's a one-cell porous thing, so anything that it can secrete out, like water or salts and things like that, it's going to be able to push it out, and it's going to be captured by these capillaries and dumped out, and eventually go out through the renal vein. Here is our glomerulus, is that sort of wavy thing here, and the bulby thing right over here is going to be the Bowman's capsule. If we keep going, we have this, and that's where we separate solids in the bloodstream from the liquid, because the liquid is what we're filtering it out. Here we have our PCT, or proximal convex tubule, and what that's basically doing, can you see how it's got all these kinks in it and turns? Well, anytime you see turns like that, you know it's for surface area, so we're going to create more surface area. You'll also see that there's a lot of arteries and veins entangled in that area, and that's designed to suck out water, suck out anything that we have too much of, and or that we don't want to push out to urine, and dump it into the bloodstream, so eventually it'll go into the venous system and just go back to the heart. We keep going, oh, of course, these are the capillaries. We keep going, we have the nephron loop, and down here it's called the loop of Henle, and you'll notice that we have a thin area and a thicker sort of tube. And what happens here is that we have the thicker segment. This is going to be for actively transporting salts. So here we're going to have a whole bunch of salt out in this area. And the reason why we dump salt and leave it in this area is because, you know, whenever we have salt, water follows. So when water is coming down this way, because there's so much salt in the outer environment, it's going to come out and start to go into the capillaries and eventually go out the artery. So salt gets dumped out here. Water is now forced to kind of go this way, because water wants to go from high concentration to low concentration until it gets to equilibrium, and it'll definitely be lower in this area. So it's going to help suck that out. Here we're going to do a lot of active transport for the salts. Eventually we go to our distal tubule. Distal tubule is going to have a lot of hormones regulating it for speed, what it should be putting out, and things like that. And then finally we're going to be in our collecting duct, which is going to push us out to urine. Also, remember that there's two different types of nephrons. There is the cortical nephron, that's going to be 80%. It's going to have a really short loop. And then there's going to be the JMN, which is going to be 20%. And this loop is going to be a lot longer. So we're acting like this is the JMN. So here is your essay question. It's a mandatory essay question, and it's going to look like this, and you're going to fill it out, and it's going to look like this. If you just label it the way it looks like this, I think it's worth 20 or 30 points. I'm going to give you 5 points, and that's it. Barely 5 points. I might even give you -5 points. But if you go ahead and tell me what each of these things do and what's coming out in each of these areas, well, now you got the 25 points, or whatever points it's going to be worth. So really what it would be is you going through and telling me what the JMN does, what the loop of Henle does, what the PCT does, and that would be done in like a couple bullet points below each of these guys. And then before we get going into our next video, this is going to be urine flow out of the kidney. Huh, clue, I wonder. Anyway, we have our Bowman's capsule, or the glomerulus. We're going to go to the proximal conventional tubule, to the nephron loop, to the distal, to the collecting duct, and this is kind of where we stopped in that last picture. If we keep going, what we're doing here is we're starting to leave the kidney itself. So we'll go to the papillary duct, the minor calyx, the major calyx. So here is the minor calyx, eventually to the major calyx, to the renal pelvis. Eventually we're going to go down the ureter, urinary bladder, urethra. The urethra is going to have a sphincter in it that you get to open up, and that's going to push on the bladder itself to give it some force, and then hopefully you find the toilet. In our next video, we'll do filtration.